State your name for the bill of sale." The auctioneer said it like he was asking the hour. No anger, no pity, just procedure. It was Charleston, September of 1854. Hot enough that even the air felt wet. I stood on a wooden platform while buyers stared at my hands, my shoulders, my teeth, my face, deciding what kind of life I was worth. For 19 years, I had been called Nell. Nell was plain. Nell was forgettable. Nell was the kind of name meant to move quietly through doorways, and never make anyone look twice. But that was not the name my mother gave me. And the man who stole that name from me was standing 30 feet away in a black summer coat, beside his wife, under a white parasol. Judge Silas Bellamy, a church trustee, a moralist, a man half the city treated like living law. My father. I looked straight at him. "My name is Rose Bellamy," I said, "and the man standing under that white parasol is selling his own daughter." For one clean second, nobody moved. Then the silence cracked. Heads turned. Eyes moved from my face to his, and back again. I watched truth travel in real time, the way it does when someone is reckless enough to say it out loud. Judge Bellamy went pale first, then red. I had imagined that face for years. Not his face on the bench. Not his face in church. Not his face at the head of the dinner table. This face. The one a man wears when the lie he lives inside suddenly has walls. My story did not begin in that auction yard. It began 19 years earlier, in the rear sewing room of the Bellamy house, where my mother stitched silk cuffs for women who would never learn her full name. Her name was Miriam. She was quick with a needle, quiet in company, and careful in the way women become careful when every mistake can cost them skin, shelter, or breath. She survived by keeping her head lowered and her hands moving. Judge Bellamy noticed her, because powerful men always notice the women they believe cannot refuse them. Not all at once. Never in a way anyone could openly name. First, extra errands. Then conversations held too long in empty passageways. Then the habit of sending other people away. By the time my mother understood the shape of her danger, it was already inside her. She hid the pregnancy as long as she could, bound herself so tightly she could barely breathe, moved slower, ate less, prayed for a miracle that did not come. Judge Bellamy's wife, Eleanor, discovered the truth when my mother fainted on the back steps carrying linen in the 8th month. There was no screaming scene, no broken glass, no wild display. Eleanor Bellamy was too disciplined for that. She did what cold people do best. She turned outrage into management. The child would be born. The child would never be acknowledged. The child would never be raised as Bellamy blood. The child would be folded into the laboring world and forgotten. Aunt Lottie was the one who made survival possible. She was the chief laundress on the place. Broad-shouldered, practical, strong from years of wringing sheets. A woman whose face never showed all of what she knew. Only months before my birth, fever had taken her grown daughter, and the baby that daughter had delivered too early. So when I came into the world alive, Judge Bellamy found his solution. Let the infant become the dead daughter's surviving child. Let her be raised under a small name. Let her grow up in the wash yard, not the schoolroom. Let the secret stay buried, where labor buried everything else. That was how Rose became Nell. Not because the house did not know who I was, because the house knew exactly who I was, and wanted a name that made me easier to place beneath notice. My mother did not die giving birth to me. That was one mercy. She lived long enough for me to know her voice, long enough to see the way she pressed her lips together whenever Judge Bellamy passed near us, and refused to look our way. She lived long enough to teach me that fear and hatred are not the same thing, though sometimes they sleep in the same bed. When I was 7, she showed me the object that made my false life unbearable. A torn page from the Bellamy family Bible. Not the whole page. Eleanor Bellamy had ripped it out when she found it, but Aunt Lottie had salvaged the larger piece before it was burned. On that page, in Judge Bellamy's own hand, was a birth entry begun in panic, weakness, or conscience. Whatever poor name a man gives the moment before he chooses cowardice. Rose, daughter born this day. The ink broke where the page had been torn, but the surname remained. Bellamy. Clear enough to read by candlelight. Clear enough to live inside my bones. He gave you the name once, my mother whispered. Then he spent every year after trying to take it back. Then why am I Nell? Because Nell can live, she said. Rose is what they fear. My mother died when I was 12. Not in childbirth. In one of those summer fevers that sweep through low places and take whoever has the least room to resist. By then, I was old enough to understand the world had made a permanent plan for me. Work, silence, usefulness, no claim. What that world had not planned for was curiosity. I learned letters the way thieves learn locks. Slowly, illegally, by watching what other people thought was not worth guarding. Discarded legal notices from Bellamy's study. School copybooks left by his youngest son. Newspaper scraps wrapped around purchased goods. Labels on medicine bottles in the pantry. Names on shipping crates down by the wharf. At night, I traced words in ashes with my finger on the cabin floor. Damp, I used a splinter. When the splinter broke, I used memory. Later, Thomas Bellamy, my father's youngest legitimate son, began leaving copy exercises in the side passage while pretending to lose them. He never said why. I never asked. But I corrected them in secret and left them where he would find them. That became our arrangement. That was how I learned enough to read the city that meant to own me. Enough to read names, enough to read ledgers, enough to read the law. Enough to understand that blood, by itself, did not save anyone. As I grew older, the resemblance became less deniable. Not because I was beautiful. Beauty was too soft a word for what frightened them. It was structure. The same hazel eyes, the same straight bridge of the nose. The same tense line at the mouth when angry. The same way of standing very still when refusing to yield. I saw it first in window glass. Then in the polished side of a silver tray. Then in other people's faces, those split-second looks that said they had seen something they were not supposed to name. Judge Bellamy solved that problem the way he solved everything involving me. He pretended not to see it. He passed me in hallways without recognition. He heard my voice in the yard and did not turn. He watched me carry coffee into rooms and treated me like furniture that had learned to walk. But denial is easiest when a secret is small. Secrets grow dangerous when they become 19-year-old women with a reading hand, a direct gaze, and a face the whole city can compare against a judge's. The year I turned 19, Bellamy's household became crowded with ambition. His appointment to a higher court was being spoken of openly. His eldest daughter was nearing marriage. Guests came and went, ministers dined with merchants. Politicians visited at dusk. Everything in the house had the strained polish of people preparing for ascent. Then one afternoon, during fittings for his daughter's wedding clothes, an aunt from Beaufort looked at me too long. She said only this, "That yard girl has Bellamy eyes." That was enough. After that, the air in the house changed. Papers moved. Closets were inventoried. The estate clerk spent 2 full days writing figures into sale books. Rice losses were discussed. Freight costs. Repairs. Efficiency. The kind of language respectable people use when they want cruelty to sound like management.
Then Aunt Lottie came into the cabin after dark with the list in her hand. My name was third. Nell. House servant, age 19, literate, sound health, fine hands, suitable for domestic placement or light supervisory work. I read it once. Then again. Then I saw the destination mark penciled into the margin. Preferred for inland or Gulf trade. Not local service. Not temporary use. Permanent removal.
He's sending you away, Aunt Lottie said. Not because you failed him, because your face has started doing what his conscience never would. I sat down slowly because my knees had gone weak. All my life, I had known Judge Bellamy was ashamed of me. That night, I understood shame was not the right word. He was afraid. Afraid that one more dinner guest, one more courthouse rival, one more churchwoman with sharp eyes, would put the resemblance into language. Selling me south was not a business decision. It was disposal. I asked when the sale would be held. Saturday, public yard. Fast transfer. Aunt Lottie watched me too closely then, because she knew the silence in me had changed shape. What are you thinking? That he has had 19 years, I said, and I have one Saturday. She told me the sensible truth. Speaking would not free me by law. It might make buyers crueler. It might get me beaten before the sale. It might fail. Then she unwrapped the cloth bundle and put the torn Bible leaf in my hand. The paper had softened with age. The ink had browned, but the name was still there. Bellamy, and enough of the line remained to make the lie impossible once spoken aloud. What good is this? I asked. Not much in private, she said. But a market is not private. Then she leaned toward me and lowered her voice. A courtroom belongs to the man on the bench. A church belongs to the man in the pulpit. But an auction yard belongs to the first thing that makes the crowd turn its head. If you mean to speak, child, speak where witnesses can do the carrying for you. That was the plan. Small, dangerous, final. I would wait for the one question the sale itself required. The auctioneer would ask my name for the bill of sale, and I would answer with the name Judge Bellamy had spent 19 years trying to bury. The morning of the sale came with harbor heat and no wind. The other people being sold with me were frightened in the quiet way that leaves no room for speech. A cooper, 2 field hands, a seamstress with a baby still nursing, a carriage boy, an older cook with swollen fingers. We were loaded into a cart before sunrise and driven into the city while market bells still echoed. Charleston was already awake. Fishmongers shouting near the wharf. Drays rattling over stone. Salt in the air. Tar. Horse sweat. Rot. Money. The sale yard had a raised platform, a rail, a ledger table, and enough spectators to make ruin feel theatrical. I saw planters, traders, wives pretending indifference, clerks, boys, 2 newspaper men, men from rival families who never missed a chance to watch Bellamy's circle stumble. And there he was, near the front, but not too near, with Eleanor beside him. Dressed as if he had come to observe unfortunate necessity rather than stage it. 3 people sold before me. Numbers were called. Bodies became entries. No one in the crowd thought anything extraordinary was happening. Then the auctioneer beckoned me forward. I climbed the platform, and the whole yard looked flatter from up there. As if the world had been planed into something easier to hone. He made me turn, checked my hands, announced my age, mentioned literacy because it raised value, mentioned good health because that raised value too. Then he opened the ledger and asked, "State your name for the bill of sale." That was the only mercy the system had ever offered me. I used it. "My name is Rose Bellamy," I said, loud enough for the men at the fence, and the women at the rear, and the newspaper clerk by the gate. Judge Silas Bellamy, standing there in the black coat beside the white parasol, is my father. He is selling me today because he thinks distance can do what cowardice never could. He thinks if he sends me far enough away, his face will stop showing up in mine. The effect was physical. Conversation stopped. The auctioneer froze. A horse somewhere beyond the wall snorted and stamped. Then the crowd began to move. Not in body, but in attention. Eyes on me, eyes on Bellamy, back to me. I pulled the folded Bible leaf from inside my sleeve and held it up. "He wrote my name once in his own family Bible," I said. His wife tore the page. "They raised me under another name in the wash yard, so he could keep preaching order while pretending I was nobody. But I am not nobody. I am Rose Bellamy, and the man selling me knows it." Bellamy stepped forward then, because silence was no longer useful. "This is hysteria," he snapped. "A malicious fiction from a girl who has been fed dangerous ideas. Dangerous ideas. That was rich from a man watching his own handwriting tremble in my hand." "Is that what I am?" I asked him. "A fiction? You let me carry trays in your house. You let me mend your cuffs. You let me grow up 10 paces from your door. And now I'm fiction, because I have used your name where people can hear it." He told the auctioneer to proceed. Of course he did. A man like Silas Bellamy would rather call his daughter inventory in public than admit in public that he had built his respectability on her silence. But by then, the yard had already turned. One newspaper man was writing furiously. A woman near the front whispered, "Look at the eyes." A merchant by the fence muttered, "She has his mouth exactly." Even men who wanted the sale to continue were looking at Bellamy with the hungry attention reserved for the suddenly fallen. A bidder opened at 800. Another raised him. And a rice planter from down the coast called a number high enough to make my stomach drop, smiling at me the way men smile at livestock they expect to break slowly. Before the hammer could fall, another voice cut in. 1,500. A woman stepped forward from the rear of the crowd, dark travel dress, gloved hands, widow's bonnet, northern vowels, Rebecca Sloan, though I did not know her name yet. The rice planter bid again. She answered without looking at him. 2,000. Someone behind Bellamy muttered that the whole thing had become a circus. Rebecca Sloan did not care. She kept her eyes on the platform. 2,500. The planter hesitated, calculated, smiled thinly, raised once more, then Sloan said, 3,000. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with the tone of a woman ending a matter she had no intention of revisiting. The planter dropped out. The auctioneer looked to Bellamy, perhaps hoping the judge would stop the thing, deny the sale, restore ordinary order. But Bellamy could not stop it without feeding the scandal further. If he reclaimed me now, every person there would understand why, so he stood where he was, breathing like a man who had run too far in heavy clothes, and watched the hammer fall. Sold, not south, not inland, not into the long disappearance he had planned for me. As I stepped down from the platform, I looked at him once more. This time he looked back, really looked, not at a servant, not at a problem, not at a rumor, at me. It lasted perhaps a second, long enough to see there was no remorse in him, deep enough to matter, only rage that the secret had chosen its own hour. Rebecca Sloan moved me out of the yard before anyone could invent fresh trouble. Her carriage was waiting 2 streets over. We were at the wharf before full dark. By midnight we were on a coastal packet bound north. Only once Charleston had sunk into darkness behind us did she tell me why she had bid. "I came south on shipping business," she said.
And I have used shipping business before as cover for better work. When I heard what you said in that yard, I understood two things at once. First, that you were telling the truth. Second, that if you stayed in Charleston another day, every ugly kind of man would decide you were useful. Why spend $3,000 on a stranger? She looked out over the black water before answering. Because men like Bellamy count on price to finish what cruelty starts. I dislike letting them think money always wins. When we reached Philadelphia, she arranged the papers that made my freedom durable. Not miraculous, not easy, durable. For the first time in my life, I could write my own name without hiding the page. Rose Bellamy. I kept the surname, though people asked why.
Why not choose something new? Why not leave him behind entirely? Why carry the mark of a man who had tried to sell you? Because I had not taken the name from him. I had forced him to hear it. That mattered. In Philadelphia, I learned to live above survival. First as a copyist, then as an assistant in a schoolroom, eventually as a teacher myself. And the first thing I taught children was not scripture or sums. It was their names. Write it clearly. Say it clearly. Know what the world is trying to call you, and know what you're called instead. News from Charleston reached me in pieces over the years. Judge Bellamy's appointment dissolved quietly. His church seat became inconvenient to maintain. His wife withdrew from public life for a season. Then from him almost entirely. The newspapers did what newspapers do with men who build themselves out of moral language. They enjoyed the collapse. He did not go to prison. He did not starve. Power almost never pays that neatly. But he was diminished. And for a man like Silas Bellamy, who had lived on stature as much as money, diminution was its own sentence. As for me, I built a life he had never imagined worth preserving. Friends, work, students, a room with books, a desk, windows I could open when I pleased. Years in which no one could sell my tomorrow to settle their fear. Sometimes people ask whether ruining him was worth the risk. That is the wrong question. The right question is this: what was left to protect by staying silent? Silence would not have saved me. It would only have helped him. The auction yard was built to turn human beings into entries in a ledger. For 1 minute on that platform, I made it do something else. I made it witness. That is why I still remember the heat, the boards under my feet, the taste of salt in the air, the white parasol beside my father's face, and the sound in the yard after I said his name. The strange silence of a crowd discovering that truth is most dangerous when it arrives in the voice of the person everyone expected to remain quiet. He tried to sell me under the name Nell. He failed. Because once Rose Bellamy had been spoken in public, there was no room in the world big enough to bury her again.